we would like to invite the Prime Minister of Antigua. We would like to invite the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda to please join us at the podium and provide the keynote remarks for our luncheon this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, would you please put your hands together to bring with a round of applause the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Prime Minister Gaston.
Thank you very much, Excellency, distinguished leaders, to include my colleague heads in CARICOM, certainly the distinguished President of Guyana, Dr. Finale, my dear friend here, and certainly the distinguished Prime Minister of St. Kitts Nevis, Dr. Joe. Let me take this opportunity to thank the International Economic Alliance in conjunction with the Global Political Solutions for their kind invitation to address so distinguished an audience as yourselves. It is a great honor to do so, and I thank everyone for the courtesy afforded to me by your attendance. Although I must say here that unfortunately I have another engagement and may have to be very brief with my presentation. Now, I note that the theme of this symposium is Resetting Global Leadership, Pathways to Peace and Prosperity. It is an appropriate theme, for it is now urgent that leadership in the world be reset. And this is needed if mankind is to continue to cooperate in pursuing common pathways to peace and prosperity. And we all know that the many issues of global inequity, and where there is inequity, injustice, clearly peace and prosperity is on the mind. The best way in which I can emphasize the relevance and importance of this meeting is to quote remarks made by the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, just 2 days ago. And this is how he described the state of the world. And I quote, "Conflicts and climate catastrophe, mistrust and division, poverty, inequality and discrimination, rising costs of food and energy, unemployment and declining incomes, massive displacement and dislocation, the ongoing effects of a global pandemic, and a lack of access to finance in developing countries to recover. A crisis not seen in a generation." The Secretary General's observations should not be taken lightly. Right now, the world is teetering on the brink of grave disorder and major disaster. It requires enlightened leadership and certainly a governance realignment, as well as a fresh commitment to the ideals and principles of the UN Charter to reset the world in a direction that will benefit all humanity. In fact, it's important for all leaders to understand that we have a common humanity and that we must all act collectively in the interests of all humanity. As the United Nations General Assembly gathers here in New York for its 77th session, the hopes and aspirations offered by the United Nations Charter in 1945 have dimmed considerably, and the world appears far less secure than it has been for decades. That is extremely unfortunate. There are three principal reasons for the current worrying state of affairs. The first is the fracture of the international legal order caused by Russia's aggression against Ukraine and the failure of the United Nations Security Council to fulfill its mandate to safeguard global peace. The second is the threat posed to the entire global community by climate change and its disastrous effects, which have wreaked havoc in every continent of the world, leaving no nation unscathed, and which continue to loom large as the greatest threat to the earth and its peoples. And it's very unfortunate that this existential threat facing all of humanity, climate change, is seen to be an abstract issue, which suggests to me that we have a great responsibility to continue to advocate strenuously on this very significant threat in order to ensure our continued civilization. We feel in which the excesses that we have seen will continue and our human civilization will be imperiled. The third is the growing inequality among nations, which has widened the gap between the rich and the poor to the detriment of the most vulnerable. And again, whenever there is injustice, inequity, then clearly there's instability, and it also undermines peace and prosperity. Each of these factors intertwine inextricably with the other, and they all have a common factor, which is a rise of nationalism in recent decades and the decline of internationalism or multilateralism. The Russian aggression against Ukraine amounted to a violation of the sacred purpose or purposes of the United Nations Charter. One of these purposes is the suppression of acts of aggression or other breaches of the peace, and to bring about by peaceful means and in conformity with the principles of justice and international law, adjustment or settlement of international disputes or situations which might lead to a breach of the peace. And even where we see provoked and unprovoked aggressions, especially by members or permanent members of the Security Council, these are certainly inimical to maintaining global peace and stability. The consequences of Russia's aggression and the responses by member states of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, and the European Union are well known. They have worsened confusion and disruption in the production and distribution of food, creating both shortages and high costs. They have also led to chaos in logistics for shipping, air transportation, and delivery in global commerce. And they resulted in high costs of oil. Even in recent times, we have seen a decline in price, or in the price of gasoline at the pumps. All of this has harmed the finance of all nations and restricted economic growth and development. Inflation is high and rising throughout Europe. Asia, Africa, Pacific, and Latin America, and the Caribbean. 2 minutes? I think I have to do justice to my audience, so bear with me. So inflation is high and rising throughout Europe, Asia, Africa, the Pacific, Latin America, and the Caribbean. In the US, inflation is being controlled by raising interest rates, and the price of oil is being reduced by the release of oil reserves. But many of you in this room are well placed to determine if this easing is sustainable. So perhaps there's some more anxious months and years ahead of us. The overall global situation signifies no good, certainly no good for economic stability and growth if it continues. With regard to global security, the weakness of the United Nations Security Council to fulfill its obligations was woefully exposed in its inability to stop even surrounding Ukraine. The Security Council is required to ensure that all UN member states, it says shall, not may, but shall settle their international disputes by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered. In this particular case, Russia is one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council with veto powers to stop any action whatsoever, including even a statement of criticism. And this is extremely unfortunate. In fact, in essence, these permanent members, they even have the right to veto peace and stability. In fact, while I draw attention to Russia in this particular case, the other 4 permanent members of the Security Council, namely Britain, China, France, and the United States, they have also similarly exercised veto powers in their national interests in the past. All this has caused great mistrust and a lack of confidence in the United Nations Security Council as a guardian of global peace and security. For small countries such as mine, respect for and certainly adherence to the international legal order is the main protector of our security. When the legal order is flouted and military invasions occur, the world becomes a very dangerous place. And that is precisely what is happening in Ukraine. Therefore, the theme of this meeting adopts an urgent pertinence. My friends, at no time was the movement to national self-protection and rejection of international cooperation more evidently seen than in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we saw a situation in which the wealthy countries, they hoarded vaccines and almost imperiled other countries and their citizens. And it's only after they recognized that they were not safe until all was safe, that everyone was safe, that they decided to share the vaccines. And then many of them, they had several times the amount of their population in vaccines hoarded, and they had vaccines that were expiring. And again, it's only after that that they decided to share vaccines. But I think they would have come to the stark reality that nationalism does not work, and that we need to continue to promote multilateralism to ensure that we work collectively as part of the human civilization. So we hope that COVID will be a great example for the future, and that even on the issue of climate change, which is the most significant existential threat affecting all of us, that they will understand the need for us to work collectively, for there to be an all-of-society approach in order to address this existential threat. And not only that, to also curb the excesses in the fossil fuel industry. I heard my colleague, the president of Guyana, speak about the need for countries to have some level of self-determination and to engage in the production of fossil fuels. And while we do understand that certainly in the interim that there's a need to continue to engage in fossil fuel production, there's no doubt that firm timelines have to be established to phase out fossil fuels in order to reduce global temperatures and to protect the planet. That is a stark reality, and that requires a full commitment of all, notwithstanding the fact that we may have different objectives at this time. And let us understand too that even with the pandemic, there will be future pandemics. And the interesting thing about these pandemics is that they do not discriminate. They do not discriminate between rich, poor, black, white, young, old. They decimate without distinction, hence the need for us to have a reset and to ensure that we work collectively to address these threats as they arise from time to time. But again, the issue of climate change is the most significant threat, and we believe that the G20 countries in particular, who account for most of the emissions, that they have an obligation to provide leadership and to ensure too that the concept that the polluter pays is taken on board. In fact, small states like Antigua-Barbuda, that has been on the front lines of climate change, we continue to push for loss and damage. And again, even in the negotiations at these various COP, there needs to be a reset. There needs to be a rethink in terms of how we address the issue of climate and how do we get countries and even at the micro-organizational level, how do we get companies to cooperate? And we have the view that it cannot be an exclusively voluntary exercise, that there must be perhaps a legal pathway in which we hold companies and countries accountable, and to ensure that those who pollute, that they pay for the pollution, and where there are consequences or damages resulting from the pollution, that clearly there should be some form of legal compensation for those who have to suffer the effects of damage from climate change. And let us understand too that within the last few months, during the summer in particular, we have seen wildfires, we have seen tornadoes, flooding, heat waves. In fact, in Europe, we have seen temperatures over 40 degrees centigrade. I believe in Germany, there was this major river which dried up to the extent that transportation could not continue affecting trade. So all of the signs are there to show that climate change is real, and that it's not only those of us at the front lines who are suffering, but at the same time it has consequences for all nations and requiring, as I said, a reset for us to have an all-of-society approach and to work collectively to address this existential threat. But at the end of the day, we have to look forward and to put institutional arrangements in place to address various global challenges, even in terms of pandemics, having vaccine facilities in various regions rather than to have a concentration of vaccine production in the wealthy countries. And then whenever we face our next pandemic, that you have vaccine politics and the holding of vaccines. These are examples that we need to avoid, and certainly to ensure that we have a more equitable world, and one in which there will be peace and stability, because where there is no equity, as I said, it will certainly undermine peace and progress. And in the issue of on the issue of climate change again, I mean, clearly, if people cannot maintain or continue to live within their homelands, then clearly they'll become refugees and they will migrate to developed countries. So why not help these countries to keep their citizens and their residents in the countries in which they would have lived for hundreds of years? So, you know, in any case, Antigua-Barbuda itself has made a significant amount of progress. Small colony that became, former British colony that became independent in 1981, and we would have, obviously, we set our governance and established new social and economic priorities, so that initiatives that were once beyond our capacity, for example, establishing a university that was a dream that we had decades ago. We now have a university in which we're educating our people. We have a vibrant economy that is growing consistently. And we believe that, you know, by setting, you know, these type of visionary outlook, it helps to provide a focus for a population to work towards, let's say, a new dispensation. And I'll give you a case in point. Our sister island Barbuda a few years ago was actually decimated by Hurricane Irma, and the island was deemed to be uninhabitable. But by virtue of being resilient and having the type of determination and focus, Barbuda today is now emerging as the most significant island, or let's say luxury island destination in the Caribbean. In fact, within the last several years, we have attracted in excess of $3 billion in investments. And the island is now sustainable. We have built bigger, better. And again, it shows that you know, leadership really matters, and that from time to time, there has to be realignment, and certainly realignment not only at the national level but at the global level. And as I said before, we must understand that we are all in this thing together, that we are all part of a human civilization. 200,000 years ago, we had a common grandmother. We all have a common mitochondrial DNA. We're fundamentally one and the same, notwithstanding how we look, notwithstanding the color of our skin or the texture of our hair. And it means, therefore, that in terms of a global reset, we must work together as a human civilization in the interest of all humanity. Thank you very much.